Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation, featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1060 for June 9th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
I could have stayed at Laphroaig for the next 20 years and loved it, enjoyed it. I could almost see what my life would have been. But as I fancy this adventure, and I've been Islay all my life, I really wanted the opportunity to get away and try something new.
Barry MacAffer wound up his work as Laphroaig's distillery manager last week, and he's heading for a new challenge in South Korea, where he'll be building a distillery from scratch. I'll talk with Barry about his new challenge, what he'll miss about Islay, and growing up on the island later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, behind the label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Gabriel Cardarella from Dewar's here, friends. The U.S. Open Championships coming up in June at Pinehurst's iconic No. 2 course. This prestigious event has seen many legendary moments, including one featuring the Dewar's 19-year-old Champions Edition. More on that coming up.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
You know, dads aren't the best at dropping hints, so I'll do it on their behalf. Get him Redbreast, the world's most awarded single pot still Irish whiskey. Hint, hint.
Happy Father's Day from Redbreast, proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. We have to start with politics and the upcoming U.S. presidential election. Former President Donald Trump has pledged to impose a 10% tariff on all goods imported into the United States if he's elected. That would have an immediate impact on the Scotch whiskey industry. If you remember when the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on single malt whiskey imports in 2019, Scotch whiskey exports that year fell for the first time in many years. That tariff was part of a tit-for-tat tariff dispute between the U.S. and the European Union over steel and aluminum imports that saw Brussels impose a similar 25% tariff on imports of bourbon and other American whiskeys. That tariff decimated U.S. exports to the EU, particularly for smaller craft distillers. Those tariffs are currently suspended until next March after the election. Brown-Forman reported its financial results for the fourth quarter and the fiscal year this week. Sales declines in the U.S. and key global markets were largely offset by growth in emerging markets and travel retail. Jack Daniel's sales were down by 6%, and overall Brown-Forman's net sales were off by 1% for the fiscal year ending April 30th. In other news, Stock Spirits has submitted plans for a new distillery to be built near Inverary Castle in Argyll. The distillery would be used to supply malt whiskey for use in the Clan Campbell blended Scotch bottlings. Argyll and Bute Council must still sign off on planning approval for the £25 million project. If approved, construction could begin next year, with production expected to start in the fall of 2027. Rosebank Distillery is officially opened to the public after 4 years of restoration. The distillery will be offering tours ranging in price from £25 for a basic tour to £300 for a tour and tasting of 3 rare Rosebank expressions. There's also a new distillery-exclusive bottling, a 33-year-old cask strength release priced at £3,200 a bottle. A story from a couple of weeks ago that slipped through the cracks. Laphroaig has had its royal warrant to supply whiskey to Great Britain's royal family renewed. Suntory Global Spirits had to reapply for the warrant, which expired on the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Laphroaig has held a royal warrant since 1994. Berry Brothers and Rudd also saw its royal warrant as a supplier of wines and spirits to the royal family renewed. Suntory Global Spirits has upgraded the visitor experiences at the James B. Beam Distilling Company in Claremont, Kentucky. The new tours start at $25 for a Knob Creek tasting experience and tour to $350 for a Behind the Beam tour with master distillers Fred and Freddie No. That tour will be offered on a limited basis and includes warehouse visits, blending exercises, or cocktail classes. 2023 marked a record year for Kentucky tourism. According to the state's Department of Tourism, visitors to the Commonwealth spent nearly $14 billion around the state, and the bourbon industry is being credited with much of the growth. 95,000 jobs were linked to tourism in one form or another. Turning now to new whiskeys, Kentucky's Green River Bourbon is out with a new full-proof edition. It features the same mash bill as Green River's regular bourbon, but comes from barrels that are 5 to 7 years old. Until now, the only way to get a cask-strength Green River Bourbon was to buy a barrel from the distillery. It'll be available in select U.S. markets with a recommended retail price of $49.99 a bottle. I received a sample this week, and I'll share my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. I mentioned Knob Creek a couple of minutes ago. There's a new Knob Creek 10-year-old straight rye whiskey out now. It's a permanent addition to the range and will carry a recommended retail price of $69.99 a bottle. Pew Spirits has released its latest collaboration with a band, in this case, the Smashing Pumpkins. The bourbon is flavored with black tea from the tea shop owned by Smashing Pumpkins lead singer Billy Corgan and his wife. It's being released as the band prepares to start a U.S. tour later this month. It'll be available in cities along the tour schedule for around $50 a bottle. Kansas City's J. Rieger & Company has released the 2024 edition of its monogram whiskey Solera Reserve. It's a blend of straight bourbon, straight rye, and light corn whiskey that has been maturing in a Solera since 2015, along with a touch of 15-year-old Oloroso sherry. The distillery is hosting a release party and tasting June 18th. Crown Royal is entering the single malt market with a new single malt Canadian whiskey distilled at Diageo's Valleyfield, Quebec distillery. It's bottled at 45% ABV and will carry a suggested retail price of $54.99 a bottle. Highland Park has introduced the fifth release in its Cask Strength series. Cask Strength No. 5 was matured in first fill sherry-seasoned European oak and PX sherry casks. It'll have a recommended retail price of $100 a bottle. Aberfeldy has added a new addition to its Exceptional Casks series. It's a limited edition 15-year-old Cadillac white wine cask finish using sweet Cadillac wine casks. It's bottled at 43% ABV and will sell for $74.99 a bottle. Bunnahabhain is releasing its Faygiel whiskies in the U.S. There's a 14-year-old Ruby Port cask-finished single malt and a 23-year-old triple sherry wood finish. The 14-year-old is priced at around $214 a bottle, while the 23-year-old carries a recommended retail price of $714 a bottle. And Fettercairn Distillery is celebrating its 200th anniversary this year with an extremely limited 200th anniversary collection. Just 10 sets will be available worldwide. The whiskeys range from 3 to 60 years old, and their combined ages add up to 200. The collection comes in a bespoke Scottish oak cabinet. There's no word on pricing. And finally, Sweden's High Coast Distillery has launched a new special release series with an 11-year-old peated whiskey finished for 5 years in Oloroso sherry casks. It's bottled at 51.3% ABV and will be available now at Sweden's Systembolaget stores and later in select export markets. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar now and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. The Whiskey X is this Friday night in Denver, Colorado, and Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts has a Heaven's Door whiskey tasting Friday as well. The Edinburgh Whiskey Festival is this coming Saturday in Edinburgh, Scotland. Uncle Nearest founder Fawn Weaver kicks off her Love and Whiskey book tour next Monday with a flying book tour of airport bookshops in Nashville, New Orleans, New York, Atlanta, and Newark. Tickets are still available for her events in Atlanta on June 21st, Chicago on June 25th, Birmingham, Alabama on the 27th, Indianapolis on the 29th, and at the Nearest Green Distillery in Shelbyville, Tennessee, June 30th. Finally, Waterford Distillery hosts its annual Distillery Festival, June 29th in Waterford, Ireland. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A pair of socks, a book, some suspect ties, a compact toolkit. Oh, another book. And a shaving kit. Actually, I could do with that. But anyway, sometimes you've got to take things into your own hands. Go on, treat yourself.
Happy Father's Day from Redbreast, proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin and the Classic Malts lineup. Barry MacAffer wound up his work at Islay's Laphroaig Distillery last week after the Islay Festival of Malt and Music ended. He spent the last 3 years as Laphroaig's manager after John Campbell departed for Laphroaig Distillery. Barry's departure is for a similar, yet much farther away job, building a distillery from scratch in South Korea. I talked with Barry this week on an occasionally wonky Zoom call from Islay. Basically, tell us what you're going to be doing now that you're leaving Laphroaig.
I'm moving to Seoul with my partner, and we are joining a company who at the moment is popular for its RTDs, its highballs, and its beer. And we're going to together create a distillery and start making a single malt whiskey.
Why Seoul?
It was the project. It was the biggest draw for me. I met the CEO of the company, Stephen, last year, and he told me about his, he told me all about the company. He told me about the project, and it spiked my interest. And then at the beginning of this year, I just, there was a lot kind of happening. I just thought, if we don't go now, maybe we'll never go. I could have stayed at Laphroaig for the next 20 years and loved it, enjoyed it. I could almost see what my life would have been. Whereas I fancy this adventure. I've been in Islay all my life. I really wanted the opportunity to get away and try something new. And so I just rang up Stephen and just said, no, how about it? Do you want to make this an actual thing? Because he kind of joked about me going out there last year. And I kind of just thought, maybe someday. And so it was really the project. I've met the team. I like the team. And it just kind of all fitted. And I really just fancied somewhere new, to be honest.
You got tired of Islay?
I wouldn't say I'm tired of Islay. I've been in Islay all my life. And I've always said I want to go and experience a new culture, live in a new culture for a while. I don't know how long that means, but yeah, it was time to go.
What do you leave behind at Laphroaig that you're going to miss?
The team. A very easy answer. The team. It was a fantastic team there. I really enjoyed working with them. I had the opportunity to work in all the departments with everybody at different levels, different stages of my career. And they're all fantastic. It made managing the people much easier, and it's such a good team.
What did you learn from John Campbell?
A lot. I learned a lot about Laphroaig. I learned a lot about the importance of a brand. I learned a lot of whiskey creation, and just the main thing I also learned from John is a lot of how to keep a distillery legal. That was certainly the big thing. When I started as the assistant manager, when John was the manager, it was all about compliance. Compliance. So for my first 3 years, I barely spent any time with John on the creation of whiskey or blending or anything like that. It was just all about compliance, keeping it legal.
What are you going to miss most besides the people?
I'll miss the brand. It was an amazing brand to work with. I'll miss. It was an amazing brand. Laphroaig's known all around the world. So to be able to go around the world and share it with people, that was fantastic. That was really, really good. Creating new Laphroaigs was always exciting. Yeah, probably that.
You created a bunch of new Laphroaigs, as you mentioned. The latest Kerchis release that was your final one during the Phage last week. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, so it was the 30-year anniversary this year for Kerchis, and we knew that a couple of years ago, so we started planning back then for it. And the idea was really to get something different, I guess, than we've had in the last few years. So it became quite obvious what we maybe should do. I get a lot of feedback in the markets. I get a lot of feedback from consumers that they love PX release. They asked why we've discontinued the triple wood because they love the triple wood. And obviously there's a 10-year-old. Everyone that loves Laphroaig loves the 10. So if you take these three components together, you end up with a 10-year-old triple wood, but instead of Oloroso, we use the PX. So, and to me, and on paper, that to me sounds fantastic. So you put it together, and to me, it tasted fantastic. So that was how it came about.
Can you make a non-peated whiskey?
Yes. We've made non-peated Laphroaig. It exists.
For blending purposes, right?
Yeah, that's what it was created for. You never know. You never know what the future brings, but there is unpeated Laphroaig out there. We've used it in our tastings last year and this year for people to experience it, I guess.
I guess I was being a bit facetious when I asked if you could make an unpeated whiskey, knowing how peaty Laphroaig is. Going to South Korea where they have limited amounts of peat, I would suspect.
They've got peat. They've got plenty of peat. I guess it's going to have to do some trials. Are you allowed to cut it? Are you allowed to harvest it? How do you do it sustainably? And the main one is, what does it taste like? Is there any point in doing it? So we'll certainly experiment with all that.
What's it going to be like for you to build a distillery of your own?
An amazing experience. That was, when you asked why so, the opportunity to, be at a brand from the very beginning, as in the very beginning of the buildings. The brewery's already there, the still house is already there. But it was just the perfect time, and it was like the perfect storm coming together. So it's kind of like a dream come true. It's kind of like a dream come true, this opportunity.
Tell me about growing up on Islay.
Growing up on Islay, it was a very different Islay to the Islay I see today. It was very quiet. We didn't see much tourism. The thought of going to a distillery job just didn't compute. Nobody talked about this in school. Nobody talked about distillery jobs. It was a different world, the one I see now, and I didn't realise that peat smoke was so distinctive, because when I grew up here, everyone was burning peat in their houses. So it just smelling peat smoke just became the norm. It just became this normal smell. And when I first left school, I joined the Merchant Navy, and one of my first trips was from Japan to Chile. And on this trip, people were asking me, my colleagues were asking where I was from in Scotland, and I was trying to explain Islay, but none of them had heard of Islay. And then when we got to Valparaiso, there was this little pub near the where we were docked. So we went in with all my new colleagues, and lo and behold, here was Laphroaig 10-year-old on the shelf. I was like, ha! I was able to show my colleagues where Islay was, or this was from Islay. And so I bought them all at Laphroaig. And it wasn't until I kind of nosed it at that point. It's like, oh, wow, that's childhood. That's the smell I got as a kid in the street, which I just thought was the norm. It was like, that's peat smoke. And that was kind of the first time I recognized it's actually a flavour that people are using. Because before that, it wasn't really something that was talked about, I guess. Certainly not in Islay.
What did your parents do? Did they work in the distilleries or not?
When they were younger, my dad did when he was younger, yeah. He was a fisherman, and my mum's the local undertaker, director.
So what drew you into whiskey finally?
What drew me into whiskey? Honestly, I really wanted to. My trade was I was a dental technician. After merchant navy, I was a fisherman. Worked with my parents' business for a wee while. And then I studied to become a dental technician. And my dream was to build my own dental lab. And so I thought I could get a job at one of the distilleries on Islay, preferably Laphroaig. And at the time, there was a job came up through an agency. So I was just working as an agency worker in the malt floors. And that was why my main preference was Laphroaig. I absolutely loved working on the malt floors. And there as an agency worker. And within a couple of weeks, I had forgotten about the dental lab. I completely forgotten. I was just loving it. I just loved everything about it. And I got a full-time job after 9 months through an agency on the malt floors. And I never looked back. My registration fee came up for the dental association. I just didn't even pay it. I thought, nah, this is my new career. I just moved. After working in it for a couple of months, I knew it was for me.
Which distillery did your dad work at?
He was in Rosebank Distillery. He worked in Rosebank malt floors.
So malt floors kind of runs in the family.
Yeah, I guess it does. Yeah, no, it's that working on the malt floors was absolutely fantastic. The team were brilliant. It was good fun. Every day was just really good fun. It's hard work, but it was mid-20s. I was just loving it. Yeah.
What's the biggest cultural shock you expect when you get to Seoul?
That's a really good question. The language barrier. My parents think it's not going to have potatoes as part of my staple diet. That's what they think. I think the language barrier is going to be the hardest thing. I don't know. This is one we're just going to have to figure out, I guess, when we get there. I'm trying to learn Korean. We've got lessons twice a week. So hopefully we get some sort of basics before we go. But I think once we're immersed in it, we'll pick it up a bit quicker. Maybe ask me that one after 6 months of moving out. That's a good question. We can revisit. I can tell you then exactly what the challenges were.
So will this Korean distillery have a malting floor?
I've already asked the question. It's going to be very difficult because if they're in a food standards agency, it probably wouldn't allow a traditional floor maltings like we have in Laphroaig. But I would like to understand exactly what the rules are to see if there's some sort of a workaround. I would love to do floor malt out in Korea. I'd love to introduce it, I guess. Yeah.
How will you define success in this new job?
Success to me would be whenever it is 3-4 years time, 5 years time, whenever it is that we can hold our heads high and say that we've created a really good single malt. That to me would define success. Not the sales, if we can go around the markets and around the world and to see people enjoy it and get the feedback that it's a good single malt. That to me would be like this is we've hit the nail on the head. We've achieved what we set out to, or we've accomplished what we set out to do. And it sounds maybe, I don't want to say sound wrong, but it was really easy going into the Laphroaig manager's role in a way that they already had this incredible standards. We already had these incredible, everything was set up. It was all there, good to go. All you had to do was keep steering the ship in the right direction. And it was already in the right direction. Whereas this is we're building the ship to go sailing. So if we can go sailing and get to our destination, that would be creating a good whiskey.
Barry's new distillery won't be the first single malt distillery on the Korean peninsula. The Three Societies Distillery has been making single malt whiskey for 4 years now, and last year put its debut Key 1 single malt on the market. Thanks to Barry MacAffer for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Lagavulin, an award-winning single malt scotch from Islay, world-renowned for its balanced, smoky and peaty taste. Discover Lagavulin's full lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the new Green River Full-Proof Bourbon I mentioned during the news. It's bottled at 58.65% ABV, and the nose is dry with touches of leather, tobacco, dried fruits, and a touch of oak. The taste starts off with a touch of maple, followed by a burst of cinnamon, clove, and allspice. The spices fade slowly to reveal hints of honey, chocolate, and vanilla. The finish is long and spicy, and I'm scoring the Green River Full-Proof Bourbon a 93. Next up, the Spring 2024 edition of Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond Bourbon from Heaven Hill. Of course, it's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has touches of caramel candy, honey, cherries, and a soft oakiness. The taste has honey and caramel notes balanced by cinnamon and black pepper, with touches of cherries and red apples in the background. The finish is long and fruity with lingering spices. And I'm scoring the Spring 2024 Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond a 93. Finally, the folks at Never Say Die Spirits have come out with a rye whiskey to go along with their bourbon. Their Never Say Die rye is bottled at 52.5% ABV, and the nose has touches of honey, brown sugar, leather, and black tea. The taste has notes of baking spices, brown sugar, and honey, while the finish has long-lasting spices and just a hint of mint. I'm scoring the Never Say Die Rye Whiskey a 91. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,700 whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
The U.S. Open Championship has blessed us with some unforgettable moments over the years. A 45-foot birdie putt, followed by a high-five victory lap around the green. Classic. An amateur emerging from the shadows to conquer the field. Legendary. Back-to-back birdies that catapulted a trailing player into champion status. Absolutely thrilling. And then there's that magical moment when you first try the Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition, released each year to celebrate the tournament. For any true whiskey aficionado, it's a crowd-goes-wild experience. This year's Champions Edition is double-aged and then extra matured in rye casks, delivering a profile as smooth and refined as a par 4 Eagle. You'll savor notes of pear, heather honey, and peppery spice with a dusting of cocoa powder and cinnamon. Seek it out. Watch the U.S. Open from June 13th to 16th and create your own unforgettable moment with the official Scotch whiskey of the U.S. Open Championship, Dewar's. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024, Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey. Rick at the Whiskey Zone posted this, and it ties in perfectly with our segment with Barry MacAffer heading off to South Korea. Had the opportunity to experience my first Korean whiskey at a tasting of releases from the Three Societies Distillery with founder Brian Doe. Even though they've only been around for 4 years, as South Korea's first single malt whiskey distillery, they're already getting noticed at whiskey competitions, and being the first, they're helping to establish the laws and regulations around whiskey production in Korea. Rick didn't say how the whiskeys were, but we're hoping to hear more on that from him soon. Scott Rogers shared a photo from his latest whiskey tasting along with this note. Put together an Ardbeg tasting at a Wisconsin whiskey bar. Anthology, Corey Vrecken and Heavy Vapors 2023. Corey remains my favorite regular release Islay. In the background, a whiskey old-fashioned, the true rarity of the night here in the heartland of brandy old-fashions. And Douglas Griffin at D. Griffin Photo on X shared with us a BBC archive post the other day of a film clip from 1949 with an apprentice cooper being put through what they called his passing out ceremony. I've reposted the clip on our X timeline in case you'd like to watch it for yourself. And if you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You'll find it in your app store. You can also find us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
Trevor Harris, Alan Ross and Amy Jackson, Pat and Dennis Booth, Alan Mooney, John MacDonald. Just a few of the growers who help to make us the biggest distillers of organic whiskey in the world. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Balcones Distilling. Let's get something straight this week, the definition of a straight whiskey. The official U.S. definition is that it's whiskey distilled from a fermented cereal grain mash to a spirit no stronger than 80% ABV and aged in new charred oak barrels for at least 2 years, with the entry proof no stronger than 62.5% ABV. No flavors or colorings can be added to the whiskey, and that brings us to a question. How come we see so many straight whiskeys being finished in different types of barrels when that adds flavor to the whiskey? Well, the TTB allows this practice as long as it's disclosed on the label. For instance, Angel's Envy labels its whiskeys as straight bourbon finished in port wine casks. The rules are different for corn whiskeys. They have to be made from a mash of at least 80% corn and are matured in either used or uncharred barrels, but still have to be matured for 2 years to be called straight. And you can throw out the rule book when it comes to American whiskeys destined for the export market, where the U.S. rules don't apply. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Balcones Distilling, the original Texas whiskey at the forefront of the American single malt movement, exploring place and provenance with unique style whiskeys ranging from the award-winning Texas One and Lineage American single malts to their Baby Blue, straight corn whiskey, and Texas Rye bottled in bond. Discover whiskey from a new perspective at balconesdistilling.com. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple and Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Friends, get your bottle of the new Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition while you can. It's a limited release, so it won't be around forever. Order online at Dewars.com, and please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.